Good morning, everyone. I'm Doug Berkey, Executive Director of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and I'd just like to welcome everyone to our Spacepower Forum Series. We're pleased that Colonel Robert Bongiovi could join us today. He's the Director of the Launch Enterprise at the Space and Missile Systems Center, which is responsible for the service's space launch vehicles. So, sir, thanks for taking the time to join us today. And I'd like to start off by giving you an opportunity to make a few opening remarks. And so with that, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the Mitchell Institute and AFA for giving me the opportunity to share the hard work of the almost 800 people of the Space Force's launch enterprise that I have the honor to lead. And I really can't tell you how proud I am of the launch enterprise, and in particular, our unprecedented record of 83 of 83 successful national security missions. I'm also proud of the United States commercial launch providers. Big or small, they are the envy of the world. Even with the stress of this pandemic, we have continued to achieve success, and I'm excited to share them with you, as well as the challenges we face going forward. Our job in the launch enterprise is to launch national security satellites, and that means we launch the nation's eyes and ears, which we did last week, the nation's secure communications, which we did in March, right at the beginning of the pandemic, the nation's positioning, navigation, and timing systems, which we've done twice this year, and our space warfighting capability. We did do this through two main programs: the National Security Space Launch Program, providing medium through heavy lift, which currently uses 5 different launch systems. We have 6 Atlas V's on contracts, 5 Delta IV Heavies, 4 Falcon 9s, 3 Falcon Heavies, and 2 Vulcans. The other program is our small launch program, our rocket systems launch program. We have experience with more than 700 successful launches since the 1960s. A big shift for us in the recent years is a different approach to our customers. Instead of buying a launch service for a single satellite, we now have tools and processes in place to use the full capability of each launch service through multi-mission manifesting or secondary payloads. And we're seeing successes, such as deploying CubeSats before the last two AHF launches before we deployed the AHF satellite, and our recognized expertise in populating multi-mission carriers like Esper rings. And finally, and most importantly, the launch enterprise is responsible until the satellite leaves the launch vehicle on orbit. So we have a large operational role, and we provide government mission assurance critical grave for each launch. Our success is driven by our priorities and tenets for mission success. Our number one priority is always mission success. This focus on mission success is the reason why we have the 83 consecutive successful launches. And we've placed over $65 billion of what's more important, national security capability on orbit. Our next priority is very transitory, and hopefully it'll come off the list in a few years. We are in the middle of transitioning all of our national security payloads to new launch providers in the NSSL class. Obviously, a big driver to that was the RD-180 engine and the desire to stop using the Russian engine. But the other factor, which I think when you really look back at it is probably more important, was the reemergence of the U.S. commercial launch industry and our desire to take advantage of their innovation and affordability. Our third priority is enduring. It's providing assured access to space, but that's not just for today's space systems. It's for this future architectures that are coming at us that are being developed to meet the emerging threats, and they need to be on orbit when and where they need to be. And then our final priority is really a key to allowing us to achieve all this. We are working to cultivate innovative mission assurance. Again, I'm going to say this a few times, we have a launch industry that's the envy of the world. Their innovation is allowing us to innovate, particularly in the area of mission assurance. And that innovation is allowing us during this transition to be operating on 5 different launch vehicles, and then to complete that transition to flyouts in the new launch vehicles without sacrificing mission success. Some tenets that underline this is maintaining 2 or more paths to space for each satellite. That's kind of the basis of assured access to space. But it only works if the satellites can go on both launch vehicles. So we work with our customers to make that happen. We implement an end-to-end mission assurance process, not just end-to-end in time, but we also do fleet surveillance, which means we watch every launch that our providers do. And that's a key part to why we got successful. And then finally, we have to, and we do, provide our warfighters in the nation enough infrastructure to maintain readiness and strategies to manage the manifest so we can launch what needs to be launched when it needs to be launched. We don't do this at all costs. We keep a close eye on affordability, and I'm also proud of the savings we've achieved. Since the baseline was established in 2013, we've returned $7 billion that was in the NSSL budget to the Space Force, NRO, OSD, or Congress for use in other priorities. That's not estimating, that's real savings. That's money that was in our PE, and it's not money that was freed up by moving launches. It's money that, because of an action we took, we were able to return and allow it to be used for other priorities. So that to me is one of our proudest things. But that's, we're graded on estimates. So our life cycle cost estimate, we've also run that and removed the effect of the moving the launch services around. And that estimate's down $22 billion, or 28%. So by both measures, we've achieved quite a bit of affordability. And we've done that without compromising the mission assurance that leads to mission success. But I often get questions about the cost of mission assurance. So I'd like to just give you my perspective. First, launch is incredibly risky to my customers, the satellite programs. There's no riskier moment in the development of a satellite than the launch to orbit. But interestingly, launch is just a small portion of the cost of the satellite. And the mission assurance associated with the launch, that end-to-end mission assurance, is even smaller. By our calculations, it's usually about 3% of the value of the stack, which by the way is also on a percentage of this stack value, generally cheaper than the insurance for launch in the first year of on-orbit operations. But I think the real argument is that government mission assurance has a much different focus than commercial launch insurance. Our government mission assurance is there to protect against launch failure and the loss of the satellite with its critical national security capability. And on top of that, it prevents delays to other satellites with national security capability from the facility damage that might happen to the launch, and also the inevitable investigations, right? We'd much rather take the shorter time up front to get it right than the longer time in the back to figure out why we didn't get it right. On the other hand, commercial insurance is a business risk. That's what it covers. It does not prevent the loss or delay of capability or protect the capability from not being launched. It is just about making sure that if you have a failure, you can continue to operate in the future. Again, just like everything else, we don't do mission assurance in a vacuum, and we work to keep it affordable. As we fly systems, we have the tools and processes in place to reduce the amount of resources we use on recurring mission assurance. And we're down, on Atlas, we're a third of what it used to be. Even on Falcon now, we're at a half of what it was on the first launch. So we know how to work down that learning curve. But again, I have to foot stomp. It's industry innovation that's letting us do that. We're leveraging the providers' innovative approaches to help us drive down that learning curve quickly. We are doing it much quicker on the Falcon than we were able to in the past because of some of that innovation. I'd like to take a quick moment and just give a quick summary of the Small Launch and Targets Division. That's our group at Albuquerque, and they provide us some very innovative acquisition approaches that allow us to provide any launch services from suborbital to experimental large launches. We have our primary contract there is the Orbital Services Program 4 contract. That contract provides lift capability greater than 400 pounds to LEO in 24 months or less, sometimes much less. The pool on that contract right now, it's an IDIQ, is SpaceX, Crossbow, Avum, Northrop Grumman, Firefly Black, United Launch Alliance, Rocket Lab, and Vox Space. But in the next couple of months, we're going to release an RFP for the next on-ramp. And so we should see, we keep the bar fairly low. They just need to be, in the order of a year from their first launch. And so we should see the pool expanding that contract. We did award the first task order in that contract this year during the pandemic, $35 million task order to Vox Space for what's really a complicated set of technology demonstrations to inform future systems and architectures. We expect to launch about 44 CubeSats on 3 launches over 12 months starting in late 2021. And again, that's building on the success of the rocket system launch program dating back to the early 60s. We've also been working in small launch on tactical responsive launch framework. I don't see that as just a launch problem, but an overall ConOps policy, satellite and launch problem. We've been working with ways to harvest industry innovation there and support emerging warfighter needs. And we're on our side, we're working with the new small launch providers to do that. I think the technically responsive launch in the near future will be demonstrating that we can be prepared to launch within months after contract award and address all those things, not just the launch part of it, but the holistic effort. Shifting gears to phase 2, And our plans going forward, probably perhaps more importantly, in August, we awarded phase 2 to United Launch Alliance's Falcon and Falcon SpaceX systems. Because of the Assured Access to Space part of this program, this was a unique dual award. And I'm really proud of the team that pulled this strategy together and awarded the contract. I can't even scratch the surface on how complicated that really was. And they made it look easy. With this award, we'll procure about 60% of our launches from United Launch Alliance and 40% from SpaceX for the 2020 to 2024 procurement years. That means a launch from about 2022 until 2026 or 2027, depending on when the satellites, kind of flow out. Affordability was a key factor in phase 2, but we also wanted to retain the flexibility that our customers demand, rightly so. And so we were able to put a lot, in fact, pretty much all the flexibility we need into that contract and price it competitively. So it's a really good contract. And as we move forward, we're now assigning missions. We're not competing. We're doing early integration studies. The contract tells us how many each year have to go to United Launch Alliance and SpaceX. But beyond that, we'll be using our best match, assured access to space and cost to government, and really just sitting down and figuring out what the best way it is to meet the warfighters' need. So with that award now, we have like a core strategic capability, that's what I call it, that's going to be available well into the future. So now we have the opportunity to step back and assess and work with our stakeholders to establish what the future of NSSL should be. Last week, we released a request for information to industry along these lines. If you look at it, you'll see we're really interested in where innovative industry is seeing launch going in the future and what they're doing to get to that future. And it's not just how do we get from Earth to orbit, but what are the different on-orbit ConOps that might drive different launch needs? What do we need to be doing to get these future constellations up there? It's a huge moment for the future of launch, and I really think we need to take the time to get it right. Phase 2 award gives the core capability for our absolutely must-have national security capability. But now it's time to build on that partnership with industry and with our stakeholders, and again, use this launch industry that's the envy of the world to enable our future launch capabilities to meet the emerging threats. I'm going to wrap up by praising my team. I'm going to summarize some of our accomplishments. Again, since the beginning of 2020, we've launched 6 times. Actually, all 6 times have been since the beginning of the pandemic. In March, we launched AHF-6. That was the first U.S. Space Force launch. In May, we launched USSF-7, which we dedicated to COVID responders and victims. In June, we launched GPS-3, which I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it was the first time we allowed SpaceX to recover a booster on a national security space launch mission. In July, we launched NROL-129, which is a small launch, the first U.S. Space Force small launch out of Wallops in Virginia. On the 5th of this month, we launched another GPS satellite, GPS-34. Again, we were able to allow SpaceX to recover that booster. But more interestingly, and again, I'll talk about this in a minute, SpaceX intends to use that for our next GPS-3 mission, which will be our first time flying an NSSL payload on used launch hardware. And finally, last week, we launched NROL-101, and it looked like an Atlas of old, but strapped to the side are new GEM 63 motors, which both are important for United Launch Alliance's strategy to provide more affordability in the Atlas line, but also are important because they are closely related to the solids that are going to be used on Vulcan, so they buy down risk there too. Phase 2 wasn't the only focus, and launch wasn't the only focus. Again, Phase 2 permits the use of used launch hardware across the board, but our previous contracts did not. Because we needed to really understand how we got to the mission success and government mission assurance posture we needed to be at. But we didn't want to wait for phase 2 to get on with that. So what we did was what you're seeing happen. We negotiated first the recovery of the hardware on launches. We already had some of the phase 1s had recovery, but we accelerated that to some of these GPS launches. And we did it, and then we stepped back and we worked with SpaceX to understand what we needed to do to get to low risk on used hardware, and we negotiated the use of used hardware on already awarded missions. We did this methodically to ensure we didn't increase our risk, but we also ensured the taxpayer retained a good deal they got in those competitive awards. So we saved an additional $65 million over the 4 launches that were affected, 53 of which was pure price reduction. So that's fantastic. And as we look forward to our future, the workload does not go down. Over the next 18 months, we're going to be focusing, of course, on maintaining our mission success record. but also on our small launch industry and how we continue to encourage and develop that what's a very dynamic and exciting part of our industry. We're going to complete this transition to fully reusable SpaceX fleet for our national security space launch missions. And we're going to continue with partnering with United Launch Alliance and their Vulcan development. And they're going to have those initial certification flights, and those are going to be very important to our ability to do our first national security space launch flights. And finally, we're going to work with our stakeholders to take advantage of the opportunity we have right now and define the plan for NSSL post phase 2. Again, I want to thank the Mitchell Institute and AFA for allowing me to share the activities and accomplishments of the Space Force's Launch Enterprise. And I want to thank you, the audience for your time and attention. Thanks.
So really appreciate that insight. And it's just an incredible rundown. You guys have been so busy this year. And with all the variables in play, hats off to your team. That's incredible to keep up that pace. So let's start the first question, really looking at Chinese space capabilities. Earlier this month, both China and the U.S. conducted major space satellite launches within hours of each other. By some estimates, China is on track to conduct more satellite launches this year for the third year in a row than any other country. Is this a valuable statistic for understanding U.S.-China competition in space? And if not, how would you characterize their space launch capabilities vis-a-vis China?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the market for launch is pretty interesting. So there are clearly areas in this market that are only captured by certain countries, and then there's addressable market, which is available to all. And I think if you look as our industry has continued to innovate and become more affordable, that since 2016, the European Union, but mostly the U.S. has dominated the share of these addressable launches, the launches that are really available on the open market and aren't going to one provider or the other just because of where they are. Now we are paying a lot of attention to the market, and as we pay attention to this market, you'll notice even there where things could be addressable, there's sometimes a bias towards the home country, but I think we are this industry that's out there right now has really done a fantastic job of going after the addressable market and dominating it over the last few years from zero just less than 10 years ago.
No, it's really interesting. Kind of turn to responsive launch. The second major ABMS exercise in September featured a demonstration of a responsive launch simulation. What did you learn from that demonstration, and where do you see the future heading in terms of developing flexible and affordable launch systems?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think, and I hit on it in my talking points. I see tactical responsive launch. The word launch is always in there, but it's much bigger than launch. And I think that's what really happened in that demo is that they were really exercising a lot of the part of the tactical responsive launch that's not the launch, which is, how do you plan for it? What are your CONOPS? How do you decide? What we're trying to do with other places is try to figure out how to have a demonstration where you really kind of exercise the end-to-end and force all that to happen, including the satellites. I mean, these satellites are, you can have launch. In fact, I actually think launch is pretty ready for this kind of stuff, but you can have launch ready to go. And if your satellites and all this other stuff is ready to go, it just doesn't matter. So that's what I think we got out of ABMS is a greater understanding across the board of what it's going to take to have a tactical responsive launch capability and why we might want it.
No, that's interesting. So if you're to look at kind of building off that theme of ABMS, integrating with JADC2, the space domain is undoubtedly going to play a central role in DoD's vision for joint all-domain command and control.
Right.
It's already been incorporated in field tests. So how is Space Launch Enterprise adapting to fulfill the vision of a more networked and integrated force?
Yeah. I think it's very closely related to the last question, right? I mean, I think, this is really about the data and sharing the data to everybody at the speed of the fight we're going to be at, and in space capability, like you said. I mean, we're going to be both transporting and providing. And launch then is really we talked about the tactical launch, but even the normal launch, that's our job, is to make sure that capability is on orbit. That's, and so that's really, I think, our biggest role is to we've worked hard on phase 2 to get the flexibility and the planning that's needed to make sure those tools are available for that, that feed into that system. But that's the big deal with this RFI and the planning we're doing and getting the stakeholders together is I think, this approach is going to put demands. It's not just threats that are going to put demands on our future space architectures. It's going to be a lot of this stuff. And we have to have a launch capability that allows us to implement that.
No, very good. So looking at EELV to NNSL, during the transition last year from the EELV program to the National Security Space Launch Program, you mentioned that you hoped it would spur partnerships between the Air Force, Space Force, commercial space launch industry. And has this been your experience in the year since then?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this whole program has been a partnership from day one, and it's ebbed and flowed based on the market, and certainly recently with our OTAs and everything, it's been a partnership. But as I said in my speech, we have really worked hard to take advantage of industry innovation. The big apparent one is the reuse capability that we're accelerating, and we like to think we also help industry. I think our government mission assurance and also NASA's work on some of their on some of their missions, they're not willing to take risk on like ours. I think that really is like a tide that raises all boats. And so, we try not to be intrusive about it, but we try to go in there and provide value when we work with providers. So I think there's a partnership there. And then finally, again, I think if you look at this RFI, we're not trying to go down a road of this is our requirements, flex to meet it. What we're really trying to do with that RFI is here's the things we're thinking about. What are you thinking about? And then go to our satellites. What are you thinking about? And then try to figure out how we start, getting onto, roadways that might be parallel or the same broad pathway that we can leverage. I think that's the way to go here, and I think it can be done.
Mm-hmm. You touched upon this earlier when you were discussing, but turning back to small launch, Dr. Roper spoke in April about the tremendous innovation that has occurred in the small launch industry. Now, how do you evaluate the current state of play in this field?
I think it's exciting. My goal is to keep it moving and let the market forces kind of help us figure out who's gonna be around. I think that's actually happening literally today. Some of that. There are dozens of small launch providers, and I think we view our relationship with them as trying to be helpful to them. But Rocket Lab is the one that's been successful thus far. They launched in 2018 and are clearly hitting a stride. And then we have a few right behind them, I think, that are going to be catching up quickly. We're involved. Some of them we have contracts with. Some of them we have other relationships with that we are just trying to keep this industry. The momentum, and the way I think of it is the momentum into the industry so that it can play itself out, and then we'll have a very robust capability for the nation as we move forward.
Yeah. Following up on that, Dr. Roper also discussed the risks that COVID-19 fallout poses to stability in this emerging market. What can the service do to manage these risks?
Yeah, I think we've been watching that pretty closely, and we have considered some actions. We have, we do consider it as we award contracts. We do, we have across the board, taking the opportunity, some of the authorities provided to us under the COVID situation to help the, all the providers that we have contracts with. And we are seeing impacts, but I think right now, we're also seeing, capital flowing and things like that. So we're in there watching, keeping a plan ready to go as far as, if more opportunities come up. But right now we've between the contract awards, the interacting with our current providers, making sure that we've taken action when needed on, so we can in our contracts, and then just really providing that partnership of our technical expertise as they work through getting to their first launch. I think that's what we do to keep the momentum in this industry.
Yeah, no, it's incredible momentum though, like you described. And to think, a few years back and then where we are now, it's amazing. Looking at the Space Force and really where things are right now, it's coming up on the 1 year anniversary for the founding of the newest service. And so how's your team integrating with the Space Force, and how do you see that relationship evolving over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, the Space Force provides an incredible amount of focus and drive to this mission area. Obviously, launch is a very visible part of the Space Force, and we're proud that we kind of get to be the exemplar. But really, the hard work is done by the people you don't see. And I'm not talking about launch. I'm talking about the people who are working with the on-orbit assets and all the control facilities, and all the planning cells, and all that stuff. But we're honored that we kind of are the exemplar with the big launch moment. But as far as my perspective on the Space Force, and I actually saw General Raymond was making some comments along these lines. I think it's going to be a very streamlined and agile force, which is great. It's great for the launch enterprise. I think we've demonstrated through the years, and definitely with Phase 2, that we're willing to be innovative and take approaches that get us the capability we need in new and exciting ways without taking unnecessary risk. And I think that this agile organization with and authorities that will be delegated, and the shorter command chains, and all that is just going to allow us to. In fact, we may be in some places the exemplar of how you operate as contractually, and then you can take those efficiencies built in by the stand-up of the Space Force, and it'll be exponential, I think, as we move forward into our planning as far as what we're going to be able to do. So I'm really excited about it.
That's great. An incredible period of history right now we're living through. So earlier this year, you oversaw the competition and contracts for Phase 2 of the National Security Space Launch Program, which marked a milestone in the effort to transition the department away from Russian RD-180 engines. Can you tell us a little bit more about the significance of this Phase 2 award and what we might expect for Phase 3?
Yeah, again, I mean, I mentioned in my comments, I think that this contract provides affordable access to space for our critical national security payloads. It does it with the flexibility that's demanded of us. And so we have an incredible strategic capability, and we're in really great shape with the Phase 2 award. So now, as we look to Phase 3, then I think we really do have the opportunity to step back. I keep saying this, right? Industry has a view of the future that is very expansive, and I think we need to go and understand why and how they reach that view and what they're investing in, and then really work with our space architects and the satellite providers and understand, can we take advantage of that, and where can we take advantage of it? And because our core capabilities are in really, really good shape. So, I think this is just one of those, once in a lifetime opportunities to really think about how we want to do things. And I mean, the threat's there. We've got to do something. So.
Yeah. Now, following up a bit on that, should DoD prepare for a future with only 2 U.S. providers of NNS certified heavy launch lift services, or what are the implications of this?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think that came from a RAND study we commissioned a few years ago. That was their key finding, right? Long term, it's hard to envision a world where there's 2 providers. In fact, I think if you read it closely, it really says even 2 may be tricky. Again, that's why embarking on this post Phase 2 discussion is really important. In that RFI, we ask a lot of questions about what are you planning, why, and of course we'll go have one-on-one conversations and work to figure this out. We got to get some honest conversations going with industry regarding where they're going and why. And we've got to talk to our satellite customers and understand their demand. And then finally, I think the big part, and I already mentioned this too, is we need to make sure we really understand not just our manifest, but the commercial manifest, the civil manifest. So we're putting our tools in place to be able to do that. And then, I guess the last thing I'll say is my experience of over doing this 20 plus years is I've learned to take optimistic launch forecasts with a grain of salt. So I think, I certainly am not going to disagree with the overall findings of RAND, but I'm also not letting that railroad me into a vision of the future. I think we have a lot of conversations and understanding to get to before before we're ready to say what our future really holds.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, a different vector on future potential here. Last month, Transcom head General Stephen Lyons discussed the potential of using space launch vehicles to transport supplies in the event of an emergency. From a space launch perspective, what would it take to make this idea a reality? And what are the economics in play with this? How would it even be affordable relative to alternative solutions?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I think SpaceX in particular has been sharing it for a while. Yeah. I think, what I'll say is we've been working, especially over the last few months, to make sure that we provide our expertise into those organizations as they assess viability. I certainly don't think we at the launch enterprise and in general, maybe even industry, have the insight to answer your question yet. I think industry is they're developing new capability. I mean, look at the systems that Blue Origin and SpaceX are developing. Even Launch Alliance is some of their plans, and I think that they're going to provide us the opportunity to see and take advantage of new uses for their systems. I don't know that this is going to be one of them. I don't think we're far enough down the path, but it's certainly an exciting time in launch. I think there's going to be some new things that we use launch for as these systems are developed. So it's pretty cool.
No, I understand. It would certainly give new meaning to just-in-time delivery. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
There's a long way to even know if it's viable.
No, I get it. Looking to the future also with other facts that are important to look at. Last month, the FAA released a new revised streamlined set of regulations governing commercial space launch and reentry licensing. How will these new rules affect your operations, and how important are they to fostering innovation in the commercial space industry?
Yeah, I'm really pleased the FAA did that. First of all, just a comment on our operations. So generally, definitely for national security space launch, and generally for all of our launches, we don't use FAA licensing. So it's generally we do it under our authorities, and so there won't be necessarily a direct impact to our operations. But as I think we are so reliant on we are so much better because we have a vibrant commercial launch industry, and these FAA changes really will help them. Some of the changes that are in there really allow the industry to focus on doing launch safely, and not focus on a bureaucratic paperwork drill to prove that they're doing safely. So I really do like the FAA taking this on. Again, we are barely involved in the launch enterprise, mostly because we generally don't use FAA licensing, but we have been there all along the way. But as far as an impact on my mission, I think it's a huge deal because of what it does to industry.
No, I understand. And last question here before we turn to the audience. It's really, we touched upon this earlier in one vein, but it's COVID-19 and its impacts on space launch. The crisis created by this has yielded challenges for all the services. And how has the launch enterprise adjusted to operating in the middle of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our jobs to assure access to space, and we've been doing that. In fact, all of our launches, like I said earlier, have happened during the pandemic. On day-to-day operations, the launch enterprise is actually probably one of the more well-suited organizations for remote working. And so we generally keep a pretty small footprint day-to-day on site, at both operating locations. But when you start getting the mission assurance, mission assurance requires we go pretty far down into the system to understand it. Requires a lot of access to sensitive data from suppliers, not even from the top level providers, and a lot of times they just will not let us have that off site. So we still have a fair amount of travel that we do for mission assurance. That's mission essential stuff, so we do it, and we do it safely, and we do it with as few people as we can. And then of course launch operations, we do deploy crews for that. I will say we deploy much smaller crews than we used to. We deploy just the people we need to deploy, plus the people we absolutely need to train to do the personnel transitions that we're always working through. And we've really shined here, though, and we've shined in a couple places. One is at the facilities and in the processing launch base. They have the COVID protocols in place that when we have, the inevitable experience, it's a, it may have a day to clean or something, but we can work through it. And then the final thing that's really been great is we have implemented a ton of remote capability that we've been working for over the years. So many of the engineers that support launch now that used to be in large crowded rooms are now dispersed, but they're still provided the displays and the communication tools they need to support the launch. I mean, they literally are seeing the same stuff they would have seen in the control room at the beginning of the year, and that's working very well. So I'm really pleased with how that was introduced, and it's totally changed how we do launch.
Yeah, that is really incredible, and especially the dispersion of your workforce and all that. When you're talking about, you think back to some of the archival footage of the early days of space launch. It's amazing to think of disaggregating like that. So, now, hats off to you guys. So, sir, again, thank you for your comments on these critical issues. And on behalf of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, we really wish you the very best. And so, thanks again. So with that, we're going to open up the session to questions from the audience who've been listening to our conversation. And as a reminder, everybody, we'd ask that if you have a question, please use the raise hand function on your computer. So with that, I see Teresa Hitchens from Breaking Defense. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this, sir. I need to ask a clarifying question, and then I have a real question. But the clarifying question is, I just want to make sure I understand that this RFI is to help you shape the contract for phase 3. Is that correct? Or is it something beyond that? Just a little confused about the exact purpose of the RFI.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it absolutely is intended to help us understand where we need to make the investments to do the launch procurements starting in 2025, which is post phase 2. So if that'll be called phase 3, sure, it'll be for phase 3. But we're trying to be careful that we don't we don't box ourselves in. This is we really want to take advantage of this opportunity to understand what we're facing and make sure that we have the right plan in place and work with our stakeholder community to get that plan in place. So that's what we're looking at. Is this RFI is focused on what's going on and where should we invest our precious dollars to get to the next set of procurements and meet our needs, our warfighter needs with those with the industry innovative solutions.
Okay, with that in mind then, when I looked at the RFI, I noticed that there were several places where it talked about launches beyond GEO into cislunar space. Are you seriously thinking that you are going to need launches to that region of space within the next 5 years, which is what I would assume a phase 3 contract would cover for launch? So, is that on the plan?
Yeah, so let's step back and talk about the timeline. The timeline for the phase 2 launches is through 26 and probably early 27. So, I mean, we're talking the end of the decade with anything that's on the next procurement contract. And I think, again, this is why we want to, why we're trying to keep our aperture open. I mean, maybe there's a phase, maybe there's a part of the contracts that is very focused on the strategic capability, and that's what gets us to the end of the decade or into the next decade. And maybe there's a cut in that's not at a 5-year point, or maybe the cut in is further out. I don't think we're at the position to know both what the demand is, but also what the where industry is going to be, and what's the viable way even to consider other orbits if that's what we're asked to do.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got a question here from Rachel Cohen, Air Force Magazine. So she's asking, how do you see your relationship evolving with smaller spaceports like Wallops Island and one that's proposed in Michigan and others? And what does the Space Force need to do differently to take advantage of those locations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have a great relationship with Wallops and Kodiak that's been built over the years. I think it'd be good as we move forward and as those other spaceports increase their ability to do orbital launch. I think we'll be looking to them and looking to partner with them to figure out how to do this. There's, to me, the future is like a big fan, and it's not clear where it's going. And so, in the parts of the fan where there's a gazillion small launches, we're going to need those capabilities, and we're certainly willing to talk and work with them. But certainly our biggest spaceports right now, the ones we work with the most, are the two large ones that are the Space Force's ones, and then of course Wallops and Kodiak. We'll be doing some other work here and there, but those four are the ones that we do most of our efforts out of.
No, very good. Sandra Irwin.
Hi, Colonel Bongiovi. Thank you for doing this. I have a question about SpaceX is going to be launching an NRO payload in a few weeks. It's NROL 108, but it's not the NSSL program launch. Also, we saw the Space Development Agency seeking bids for to launch 28 satellites. That's also not in your program. So why are these agencies doing their own bidding for launches? And is that a problem for your program that these agencies are doing that? Thanks.
So yeah, it's a good question. I think for both of those, I need to refer you to the agencies to talk about their program. I think in the way we've constructed all of our contracts, and most importantly, phase 2 is to provide affordable, innovative, and access to space with the providers in a way that really removes it from the satellite program manager's worries. So certainly as the program manager of Launch Enterprise, I'm going to be advocating the use of these tools that we've worked hard to make very customer focused as much as possible. But I think you'll have to talk to those two agencies on why they chose different approaches, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for the use of our contracts across the board. And I think they all both of those organizations. I do want to be very clear. I think both of those organizations intend to use our contracts predominantly across the board.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick follow-up, speaking of the NRO, NRO L44 has been delayed multiple times. Do you have concerns about the Delta IV Heavy being able to launch these 5 missions that they have on contract? What is sort of your take on that right now?
Yeah, we've always had fly-out concerns on a Delta IV Heavy. From day one, we put the Delta IV Heavy sole source in place because we assessed that the risk of trying to move those complex missions to new launch vehicles was much, much higher than the risk of flying out a Delta IV Heavy. And I still think that's true. The way the program was built and the contract was built is that we would go through a series of reviews. The routine maintenance would be done, but we would be making sure we're paying attention to the more major maintenance items and working through those on a case-by-case basis. I think this has highlighted that we had already started that process, but this launch in particular has highlighted that we need to really ramp up our plan for that. And so as soon as we can get this launch off, we'll do a more holistic assessment of where the infrastructure stands, in particular for the Delta IV Heavy missions, and make sure that we've addressed. We both have a solid plan, that the contract has a solid plan for the routine maintenance, and we've addressed any major maintenance items that need to be done. And I think this is an unfortunate delay. We never like to have a launch vehicle and a satellite sitting there that's long, but we also need to make sure that it's ready. We need to launch successfully when we're ready to launch. We're working with due diligence to get there, but the big deal is to make sure that this launch is successful.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Courtney Albin.
Hi, yeah, sir. Thanks for doing this today. I wanted to ask or follow up, I guess, on the line of questioning around the RFI for future launch technologies. I guess, like, looking ahead, if SMC ends up creating this NSSL research and development program, which it sounds like will be at least partially focused on new technologies, but would it also serve the function of helping new entrants meet national security requirements like the LSAs did? Is there still a kind of desire to do that from SMC's point of view? And then a second part of that question, the LSAs for phase 2, have you terminated those yet for Blue Origin and Northrop? And if not, when do you think that'll happen?
Yeah, no, we on the first question, I think that all comes down to an assessment that's always done as part of the strategy of where's our market and how do we achieve the competitive landscape that we want. And certainly we're going to be working with others on certification and the amount of funding that might go just for those efforts. I think I don't think we're at the point where we're ready to make a recommendation. I think there's been some discussions in the process about it. So I think we are still in the, again, we just awarded phase 2. I think we are certainly in discussions with how do we continue certification with the others. But then as far as what kind of funding and how much, I think we really need to understand better where things are going and where we need to go, and then put that priority in place and put it against the rest of the Space Force's priorities and see what we can afford.
The other part of my question was about the LSAs for phase 2.
Yeah, we are working to end those. They have not ended. Our intent is still to end them by the end of the calendar year. So those are on track to gracefully end. The hard part of that is just making sure that we get the final kind of benefits out of there. Both of those LSAs have some access to data and stuff that I think will help us in the future. So that's really what we're working on to get finalized. But we're in general agreement with both partners on ending those at the end of the calendar year.
Great. We've got a few more questions here typed in. One here, is your team on track to award in January the Launch Enterprise Systems Engineering and Integration contract?
Yeah, that's still in source selection, so I'm not going to answer the question.
Yep. Okay. And then another question here, are there new technologies being explored that place satellites on orbit other than with rocket boosters?
Not in the time frame that I work in, I would say. I would refer that to maybe AFRL or some of the more technology, but I think, and we'll see what the RFI comes back with, but as far as I know, there's no technologies in the timelines that we're operating under that are going to be available.
Oh, good deal. Well, sir, with that, we've come to the end of the Spacepower Forum event. So thanks again. We really appreciate your time, and to our audience, from all of us here at the Mitchell Institute, have a great aerospace kind of day and have a great holiday next week. So, sir, thanks again. We really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for hosting me, and thanks to the audience for attending.
Take care.